that I became an atheist. I was at second grade, I kind of asked myself the question, like, what if Jesus is just another Santa Claus, you know? And which is a funny thing, because Santa Claus actually existed in Greece, and he died in 343 AD. So even Santa Claus isn't another Santa Claus, but you know, but you know what I mean, right? I thought it was a fictitious tale, and I had none of my sense organs could orient me or prove to me that piece of bread that I was receiving and supposed to revere as Jesus Christ was actually what it said it was. And so that was a little bit of a crisis to me, and I didn't tell anyone about it. You know, I didn't want to tell my parents. It's like, I don't, you know, what do I say about this? You know, I was second grade, so I continued. I'm an analytical person. My degree's in mathematics, and so every class I was in throughout my entire education was oriented around teaching me these kinds of analytical skills about reality that set me up for really not believing in anything beyond what I could prove with a formula or an equation or what I could measure. And it was as if, you know, for me growing up, that if I could predict it, then I could feel confident, right? If I could prove it, I felt that I could trust it, right? And it's a really interesting question to ask all of you, to ask yourselves, like, when something seems a little scary, what do you rely on to get you through it, right? Some people will rely on strength. Some people, like me, relied on an analysis. Like, if I sit down and analyze the situation, I can get myself comfortable about it. So that was my faith. That was where I turned, what I turned to. And what I turned away from was my faith in Jesus Christ. And so that lasted through my college years. In fact, it was like strengthened in my college years. Like, the more math I learned, it was kind of, it took me away from my faith. And then what happened was, a few years after I graduated, I was in Paris, walking along the Seine River. It was this very romantic night. I was by myself, and I could see these couples that were, you know, kind of enjoying one another's company, that seemed like they were in love, and the street lights and, you know, glimmering off the river, and it was, you know, it was all quite beautiful. But to my mathematical mind, I was like, yeah, but what is beauty anyway? You know, and like, I felt sad. There was something about that was really sad to me, that like I couldn't participate in it fully because I couldn't believe in it fully. It somehow seemed like a mirage, or somehow fake. And could I really, you know, trust another person that, you know, if a person loved me, like, could I even trust them? How could I prove that, you know, that I could invest my life with them? What tools did I have for that, with all that I had learned in my whole education? That was a conundrum for me. And so I felt that sadness, not for the first time, but it was a recurrent sadness that I felt for many, many years. But at that moment, where I was and who I was just totally opposite in my mind, you know, and that created an existential crisis for me. That was like, why am I even here? You know, what am I alive for if the world is just a big math equation, and, you know, and even love is a biochemical, and you know, all that kind of thinking. And I came to the conclusion that, like, I had to make a choice. If I wanted love in my life, I had to make a choice, that there was something magical about this world, something miraculous about this world that I could not explain. And I couldn't prove it, And it was really scary for me to make a choice, but I decided in that moment that I was going to live my life in a new way, because there had to be something more. And so I was like, well, what do I do now? I was like, oh, I think I will study like art and beauty and sensuality. You know, that would be meaningful. That would be something that I could like enjoy. That's like not just a math equation, right? And so that became my God. Like I changed from the God of math to, you know, the God of art, beauty, and sensuality, and that you know, that created a lot of exciting possibilities, but it went south. You know, hedonism is not it didn't work for me. You know, it was like, then everything beautiful became somehow meaningless also, because yeah, well, I was reading a book called The Portrait of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. It's a great book, and I read it, and I was like, I'm that man, you know. And I felt, and so that was a crisis, right? That was another crisis for me, and I realized that no, like there's true intimacy, and things are beautiful if you. The proper way to show that something is wonderfully beautiful is to sacrifice yourself to it, not to consume it and take from it. And so that was a big change for me. I had to live my life in a new way. So I was really at that time I was really into Islamic architecture, and I was studying Islamic architecture. And I had all these books on Islamic art. I was just like, there was a certain mysticism there that I found very appealing. And also there was something about Islam to me that seemed like very powerful and very masculine. Like as a young man, 28-year-old man, I was searching for power. And Islam seemed so clear and so righteous. So I was living in Morocco in a city called Fez, and I was studying Arabic there. And Fez is an amazing city. It's a World Heritage, UNESCO World Heritage site, and it's a walled city. You can't get a car into Fez. And so all the transportation is by donkey, and it's very much like a medieval city. You go there, and there's the vendors and the marketplaces and all that. And I was really into language. I was really into Arabic, and I was really into Islamic architecture. And I converted to Islam in Fez while I was there, and there's a whole story around that, which I won't, tell you right now. But sometime that would be I'd like to share that. But so then I got really into Islam. Like, it's hard for me to go halfway into something, right? So I was like studying the Quran, reading it in Arabic, trying to memorize it, and there was no mosques near where I lived when I went back to Brooklyn, so I would shout the call to prayer outside of my window in the Brooklyn apartment 5 times a day, and it was just like that, right? I was into it, and so my parents were not into that choice of mine, but they were upset, but I continued, and I was working on a public health project in Bangladesh for a year and a half, and I had studied Bengali for 10 years, and and spoke Bengali well, and still speak Bengali. And I was also filming folk musicians in the slums of Dhaka City. Dhaka City is like New York City in population, or twice the size of New York City in population. It's like 20 million people packed into this place. It was an intense place to be, a very intense place to be. Hot, lots of people, and I loved it. I grew up Italian Catholic, like pack on the people, you know, and like let's all be together, you know, like that to me was where it was at, and that warmth of togetherness was something that really appealed to me about Bengali culture. But what happened there, as I was filming the folk musicians, there was a lot of political unrest in the country at the time, and one of the musicians that I was filming was also politically active and was targeted by jihadis and assassinated. And that was pretty close to home for me. You know, that was pretty scary for me. And there was there were bombs going off in the city while I was there, and I felt very vulnerable. And suddenly, like, I realized that that my interest in Islam was coming from this place of wanting to have power, and that I was not investing in it for the right reasons, and I suddenly felt like a stranger in a strange land. You know, like there was something that I did not understand, and a culture that I did not understand, that I was kind of dabbling in experimentally, and I just had to take a second look at it. So that, you know, that ended my journey with seeing God as power, and so I was shaken by my experience, and I came back to this country. I was also very sick. I was overconfident, you know, an overconfident young buck traveling overseas. I ate street food. It was delicious everywhere I went, and it caught up with me. You know, I probably had like, I don't know, I probably had lots of parasites, and I had lost, you know, 40 pounds. I was like a shell of a person, and a near death's door, and I came back to this country, so the next place that I turned was yoga. It's like, okay, I'm not going to do the call to prayer anymore. I'm going to try that spirituality over there. You know, that seemed very peaceful. You know, you talk to Buddhists and yogis, and Buddhism and yoga kind of come from the same philosophical root called Sankhya philosophy. But anyway, I got into yoga, and what yoga promised was freedom from all of your passions. You know, that like here I was like studying art and beauty and, you know, becoming a sensualist, and then kind of left that behind, and then I was you know, into Islam, and Islam is very passionate. It's a very passionate faith, and so I was like, okay, that was intense, you know, but I needed to kind of like, I went in the other direction. I went to the opposite. Is what I'm trying to say. Okay, and the whole practice of yoga and Buddhism is about trying to detach yourself from your passions. And the idea is that by detaching yourself from your passions, you are free to make a clear-headed decision on your own without any influence or any bias, right? So I was like, okay, you know, that kind of appeals to my math brain, you know. And I got really into it. Well, the problem was that it worked. I got really into it, and I was totally detached. Right? I was totally detached from everything. Totally detached from my emotions, totally detached from my passions, and detached from people in my life, too. in a way, it was kind of like the opposite of my Italian Catholic upbringing. And so I was detached from my life, and my life fell apart. I had I had a daughter with someone that I was not married to, and that relationship fell apart and crumbled. And I realized that, here I was, I had this Harvard degree, right? But I lost 40 pounds, I was near death, my relationship ended, and I was like on my own in court, and scared. And no rules, nothing, no direction, no authority, nothing to guide me. And I cracked, and I came, this was when I moved to Asheville. I came to the Basilica of St. Lawrence on my hands and knees. And I went to the Marian Chapel there, and I cried for an entire day and laid down in front of the statue and sobbed for a long time. And I realized that for all of the intellectual ability that I had, I was deeply dependent on something greater than me if I was going to survive. And I had to stop acting as if I was right all the time. That it's not just what John thinks is the right thing to do right now, that I needed something more. I needed to submit. And so I could not understand that. I could not understand it wasn't something that I came back to the Catholic Church without any intellectual justification for it at all, other than every single other thing that I had tried led me to misery, and so I just had to I had to trust in it, and it wasn't for several years, even 5, 6, 7 years before my mathematical brain could assent and agree to what my heart had experienced, right? So I came back to the Catholic faith, and one of the things that happened to me when I came back to my faith was that all the other things I was seeking were there, right? That was the funny thing about it, was Catholic churches are really artistic and beautiful, and there's just a huge tradition of art in the Catholic faith. In fact, all of the countries that I think of as artistic were also Catholic. Italy has more art per square mile than just any other country in the entire world, right? And that is because of the presence of the Catholic Church in that area. And all of the cultures that I saw as passionate, that I grew up thinking were passionate, Latino culture, Spanish culture, Italian culture, the Romance languages. They were also France, where I started my spiritual journey, were all Catholic Christian countries. And Catholicism also gave me that kind of masculine power that I was seeking also. That is strong, it's righteous, but it's also very gentle, which is what I was seeking as a yogi. And so there was, I found myself kind of, all those things I was seeking, I found it back in my faith, and that was very exciting for me. And my life started to come back together again. I met my wife, and I fell in love with her, and it was the first time in my life where I felt actually the second time, because I felt it with my daughter, the first time with my daughter, that there was something other than myself that I loved more than me. There was then when I met my wife, I was this is not even my flesh and blood, but I loved her more than I loved myself. And that was just such an incredible experience of freedom. You know, that like, that I felt a kind of joy that I had not experienced in my life before. And it wasn't because of you know, like you can, the croissant at the French pastry place over there is a really good croissant, you know? And it's got the bechamel sauce. That's why I'm thinking about it, because Emily made us a meal with some, and Lauren made us a meal with some bechamel sauce. And and you know, it's really good, but like, I ate that, right? But like, my wife I felt like I'm living for her, you know? And that, there's no greater joy than that experience. At least I have not had a greater joy than that experience. And so that altogether was very exciting for me. So I want to like, so I felt like it was a homecoming for me. But I want to talk a little bit about what it was that I was intellectually assenting to for a second, and getting at what I think is the real meat and potatoes of today's today's talk, which is around the Eucharist as the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ. And that was the thing that took me away from the church initially, because it was the thing that I rejected when I was in second grade, and it was that same thing which I could finally say yes to years after I came back into the church, right? Because it took me I practiced that, but I did not believe it for a long time. But part of belief, right, is when you believe in something. Like if I said I believe in you, right? What would that mean? That would mean that if you say something generally, not like every single thing you say is gospel, not like every single thing you say is exactly a fact, but like, I'm gonna follow and trust in you, and I'm gonna, even if I don't understand it, right? That's what it means. And so that's what I was doing with the church. So I'm just gonna trust this church, and I'm just gonna do it, and I'll figure I'll get it later, you know? And that worked. That was great. That was good enough. But it was even like better when I could finally put the pieces together, and like my whole brain could say yes to it and be like, oh no, this is real, right? And I think at the center of that story is also the center of the Catholic Mass, which is the Holy Eucharist and Holy Communion as being the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ, right? To me, the Catholic Church was making a bold statement when it said that contradicted 500 years of academic culture in the West. For 500 years, we have been learning that, like, if you can't prove it with math, or if you can't measure it, or if you can't, put an instrument up to it, it's not real, right? That's what I learned in school. That's what I learned at Harvard. It was, so now, how does the Eucharist totally flip that on its side, upside down? Well, one of the biggest limitations of science and math that brought me back to my faith was that it couldn't tell me what love was. Its definition of love was totally inadequate. You cannot measure beauty. There's no scientist that can tell you what beauty is. In fact, it was really awful. I told you about this.
No, but I know you.
It was awful. The other day, it was like 2 months ago or so, and I went on YouTube, and it was like, what is beauty? This YouTube video popped up, and I'm like, oh yeah, what is it? So I clicked on it. I was super excited about it, right? And the first 30 seconds, the first 10 seconds, it was this person talking with this very erudite accent. It was like, well, the subject of beauty is, it was like this kind of accent, right? And I was like, this guy does not know what he's talking about, because he wouldn't need that accent if he did, right? and sure enough, like 10 minutes into it, it was like, you can't really say what beauty is, or like that. And I was like, no, you've got it wrong. Like, there is something in our human nature that knows what beauty is, and we might not know every single thing about that, but there are answers out there for things that are immaterial, right? Like, we may not touch it, we can't hook up instruments to it, but any person with common sense, unless they've been denatured by the current academy, the current academic academy, they know it exists. We know that love exists. We know that something is beautiful. And so, here's a question I want to ask, right? Like, what's more real? Right? What is more real that, like, this table is made of, well, plastic. I was going to say wood, because that's made. Is it more real that this table is made of wood, or what this table's used for? Right? Like, this table has been the centerpiece of a sharing and a gathering tonight, and I can't touch that. I can't touch what happened between all of you while you were talking tonight. I can't touch that. What was more real, that this table is made of plastic, or how this table was used this evening, right? And so the challenging question that we have to ask ourselves about reality is, what's more real, the atoms or something immaterial that exists that we cannot touch, which is meaning? And in the Catholic Mass, every time the Eucharist is given to us, it is a challenge to our soul to believe in something that we cannot necessarily touch. We can't tell that it's not bread anymore. But there's something very different about it. A change has occurred. Now, are you a collection of organic molecules, right? According to science, yes. Right? And I could touch your hand or your arm or your shoulder and be like, okay, this is you, right? But if you got into a car accident and you lost your arm, like, you would still be you. So what is most real about you? What is your identity? Is it those things I can touch, or is it something I cannot touch? Any person with common sense knows that there's a me, like I say, here I am. But if you cut me open right here, you won't find that part, right? But we all know that. Any person with common sense knows that we have a soul and we say, here I am. But that can't be touched. And what is the most real thing about you? Now, yes, there's nothing about our Catholic faith that contradicts science, right? We affirm science. We just think it's much less interesting. Right? It's just much less interesting. It's real, it's good, there's lots of things we can determine from it. Like, look, I still study math. Like, I go to the beach and I see this ship out there and I'm like, if the earth is curved like this and it goes down, like, how much has the earth curved before it gets to this ship, and what was the drop about, right? And I'm like doing the trigonometry in my head, right? Like, math is cool, it's great, it's awesome. I get to see how far the ship's going down the curve of the earth, right? That may not seem interesting to any of you, but I like to do that kind of stuff. When I see the moon, I'm like, the shadow of the moon's going that way, the sun's over there, how far away from the moon is the sun angle-wise, and all that kind of stuff, right? Anyway, that's the way mathematicians think, okay? But, like, that's still much less interesting than, like, who are you really, right? And so, fundamentally, what is real about us, according to the Catholic Church, or most real about us, or most activated, or most actualized, right? Because that's a word that that I'll keep coming back to, is actualization, right? Is that dead matter becomes actualized. This table has the potential for so many uses. Like, I could use it as a workbench and cut wood. In fact, I was doing that yesterday. But like, today, this table potential is being actualized as a gathering place for friends, okay? And so it's becoming more than it was. It used to be just a table, but now it means so much more, right? It could be that a corpse is a collection of biological molecules, but when that corpse is actualized into a living, breathing person, something happened not to the matter. Something happened there that we cannot touch. Every experience that you've had in your life up till this point is something I cannot touch, but it has made you more real, more actualized, more than you were. So that was a challenge to me, because my scientific brain says, this is what's real, right? But the Catholic Church says, no, that is not what's most real. There is something immaterial that gets infused and put into every single thing that infuses it with meaning, right? And science can't touch that, can't touch meaning, but meaning is real. We know it's real. In fact, we know it's the most real thing. Because you could lose your arm and still be you. It means the material is not what's real. It's the immaterial that's more real. And for 500 years, we have been learning just the opposite. And it makes it very, very difficult for modern people to assent and agree and say yes to the Catholic Mass for that reason. We can't say yes to it because we haven't been indoctrinated that way. We haven't been formed that way. We haven't been formed to see that what is immaterial is real, and what is the material is just the clay that we're shaping. It's the clay, right? Like, and so when the priest holds up the bread and he consecrates it, he actualizes it. He changes into something that it wasn't before. It becomes something new. And that's bold. That's really bold. That is, to say yes to that is to say yes to a life of meaning, is to say yes to something great, right? And so that was exciting for me, because I want to have an adventurous life, right? I want to have fullness of life, and so that was a big shift for me. That was like really intense for me to make that change. A person, your brain has the potential to play the piano, right? And if you spent the next 2 years learning the piano, and then I saw you next time, maybe I won't be here for 2 years, but then I came back and I see you again, right? And you know how to play the piano. Like, you may look the exact same to me, but something great has happened. Like, you can play beautiful music, beautiful art, and that you've been actualized, and that change is an immaterial change to you. And yeah, so that was cool to me, and but that's not the end of the story either. What it means to me personally, that the Eucharist is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ, is, yes, that reality looks different, the whole structure of reality is different, but also there's something really gritty about that. Something something palpable about that, that to me represents, in a way, the Catholic, our Catholic way of like using all of our 5 senses to experience Jesus Christ. So we've been living quarantined for a year due to coronavirus, and at times it seemed that like social media could replace true socializing, and that, you know, if I can, you know, on Facebook, that I could, you know, talk to my friends and I don't, you know, need to see them. But the Catholic Church says, like, no, if we are going to be connected, then we need to actually connect, that we need to actually touch, we need to actually experience. And so in the Catholic Mass, we have beautiful things to look at. We have smells and incense. We hear the music. And we use all of the five senses. We taste and eat Jesus Christ in the Mass and have him inside of our body. And so that we can get God in every way possible, including the most intense way of possessing anything, which is consumption and bringing it totally into you. I'm going to give a few Bible verses here because it shows the kind of intensity of that eating of Jesus Christ, okay? He says, I am the living bread which came down from heaven. This is John chapter 6. I am the living bread which came down from heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. And the bread which I shall give for the life of the world is my flesh. That's a pretty intense statement to make. It's a pretty intense sacrifice to make. That's a pretty intense way to give yourself, like, here, have my kidney. You know, you need it. Take it. Have it for dinner. That's intense. That's intense, okay? We all know that's intense, right? So then the Jews then disputed amongst themselves, saying, how can this man give us his flesh to eat? Like, cannibalism, that's... So that was Jesus' cue, right? That was his cue, like, hey, Jesus, tell us what you really mean there, you know? Like, tell us, what were you really trying to get at there? Like, tell us that's just a symbol, that's just a metaphor, that's just like, you're talking like in a poetic language, right? So this is what Jesus replies to that. Truly, truly, I say to you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life within you. And the English translation doesn't quite do justice to the Greek here. The Greek version is better translated as, unless you gnaw on the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you shall have no life within you. To gnaw on Jesus Christ. What is the difference in your mind between eating and gnawing on something? Yes?
I guess like taking it in versus just consuming, forgetting about it, but like taking in all that like it is as a whole.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a more, yeah, what's that?
I was going to say, like, if you gnaw on something, you're not consuming it, right? Like, you don't swallow it.
Yeah, you're chewing on it, but yeah, he does say drink my blood, which includes the swallowing. But yes, you're right. If you gnaw on something, you're just chewing it. And that Greek word has that sense of chewing. Yeah? Yeah?
No, I mean, I guess I think like the word like eating versus gnawing puts it more lightly, if that makes sense. Like you can like eating is like, you know, just sense itself. The word like gnaw is more powerful than actually eating on something. I think actually like you mentioned the Greek word is actually like trogo or something.
Trogo, yeah.
Yeah, trogo. And it's actually like that kind of like same gnawing on it. I don't know, it just seems like more tangible and more powerful than like just eating.
Yeah.
Like used more metaphorically, I think, than this one makes it more actual, more literal.
Yeah.
I was gonna say like eating is just like we can eat at this table like we ate at this table, but like gnawing could be like if someone's like eating a rack of ribs, like they're gnawing on the bones and they want to get like every last bit of it like.
Yeah. 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 There's a kind of like lusting there, in the word gnawing, right? There's like a desire for it, and you're like, you think of a dog, you know, like it like really wants that thing, you know, it really wants it, and it like, and it's it's chomping on it, and it's not gonna leave any little crumb there, right? It is. Why would he say that? He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up on the last day. For my flesh is food indeed, and my blood is drink indeed. He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood abides in me, and I in him. You know, I went to this yoga conference, and there was some like really far out, like really far out old hippies. You know, I don't know if you've met any old hippies, like people from the 60s who were doing lots of LSD, and they were really out there, right? And he was telling me about world peace and all that kind of stuff. And he was like, you know, we were in this crowded room, and I went up to him and I whispered in his ear and said, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you will have no life within you. And
You're
he was
pretty
like,
bad.
and he was like, whoa. You know, and so now let's continue. What happened after this? Many of his disciples, when they heard it, said, this is a hard saying. Who can listen to it? And it was right here. You can read it in John 6:64. It is right here in the rejection of the Eucharist that Judas fell away. It was like the next sentence. It's like Judas went and to the Sanhedrin and betrayed Jesus Christ in that moment. Judas betrayed Jesus because he rejected the Eucharist being the body and blood of Jesus Christ. And many of the disciples, it says, after this, many of his disciples drew back and no longer went about with him. And then he says to Peter, will you leave too? And what does Peter say?
No.
Why not?
Where will we go? Yeah.
Where else would we go? You have the words of life, right? You have the words of everlasting life. 12 times Jesus said he was the bread that came down from heaven. 4 times he said they would have to eat my flesh and drink my blood. He did not say at any point, this is a symbol of my body, but he said, this is my body. And the priest says that. In the same way, when he gave the cup of blood, he did not say, this is the symbol of my blood, but this is my blood, and holds it up. So why? Why would he say that? Why would he say that we have to eat him in order to have life?
Wouldn't that relate with what you were saying earlier about how we're like a body, but the meaning needs to come inside of us, and by eating or by taking in Jesus himself, that gives us a meaning.
Yeah. Yeah, we're taking, if we were to talk about, like in the language of actualize, like God has actualized every potential, right? God is truth, goodness, beauty, as a person, in a person, right? In the person of Jesus Christ, and he knows everything, has actualized every potential. There's no potential that is not in God, right? And so as you said, there's that immaterial thing, that actualized potential of God that we are taking into our body and bringing it inside of us. Yeah.
Is it, yeah, like basically going off of like, is it like we're becoming one with like being one?
Yes.
It's just like, as you said, the highest form of
Mhm.
being the closest to something is like through consumption, most like eating and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like consuming the body, blood, soul, and divinity of like Christ is like becoming one with him, which is our destiny, like a foreshadow of heaven, like we become one with Jesus
Yeah.
Christ.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so, you know, and how is that union achieved? Is it achieved through like a phone call, you know, calling Jesus? It's like, oh, you know, hearing him, hearing his voice, you know. But no, as you said, no. Eating God, eating that manna, the manna that God gave to the Egyptians from heaven, it was bread from heaven. But our manna is pieces of God himself that we are eating. And so we are taking then into ourselves everything that Jesus Christ means and is into us. And what is that? What is that? So, again, what is my personal experience of the Eucharist? Is that Jesus Christ didn't leave me an orphan. I have a Father in heaven that's still there, still here, comes to me every Saturday, every Sunday. Comes to me every Sunday and gives me himself, sacrifices himself for me, and lets me eat him. And I take him into my body. I am not an orphan, but Daddy is still there with me. What else does it mean? It means that the one who loves me is in me. Our God loves us. That is different. That is different. You know, I was Hindu. I worshipped. I worship nothing, because that's what yoga worships, is nothing. It's the attempt to erase everything, really, is what yoga is. It's an attempt to dissolve all things into a union, right? And I worship that. And I also chanted to Ganesh, an elephant god. But does that God love me? Like, it didn't. There's no God that I know of that loves us. And I want to worship the God that loves me. And so when I take the Eucharist into my body, I'm taking that love into me. It's a very personal experience. I feel warmth in my soul and when I know that Jesus is inside of me. And I was sitting in Mass, and I saw all the people lining up to take the Eucharist. And one day I was looking at them, and I just started crying, because they were so eager to have God in them. And coming every week, a little bit desperate. Like, I am a desperate man. I have 5 kids. I have a wife. I have a business. I have parents. I've got to keep it all together. You know what I mean? I've got to, like, not hurt my kids when I'm stressed out, and not be too angry, or not be too, I've got to hold it all together, you know? I've already lost everything. And, like Job, but Job was innocent, and I was not. And I'm on, like, the journey of putting it all back together again. So I'm a desperate man. When I come to church on Sunday, I come desperate. I come as a failed person, and trying to pull it all back together. And to have Jesus come in that Mass and be able to take him inside of me and be like, thank you. Thank you that I have a God that loves me, is like the thread that I'm hanging on some weeks. That is really important to me. It's really important to me to have that intimacy with Jesus. And when I see him on the cross, and be like, there's my best friend right there, and you are with me now. There's my best friend who gave his life for me. And I feel like Peter, you know, sometimes I go to Mass and I'm like, is this enough? Like, I could be having a croissant at the French bakery right now, or what? But is the croissant my best friend?
No.
Is the croissant going to sacrifice his life for me? Is he going to, like, chop off his hand and give it to me to eat? You know, is he going to, did he make the world because he loved it, and just because he wanted it to exist? Just because he wanted to enjoy this creation? Just because he wanted to make a beautiful beach and beautiful trees and beautiful birds and all that? That's the God I want to be with, the God of life, you know? Where else can I go? Really, I'm not going to turn from that to a croissant, you know? And even though it's super tasty. And if I turn to the one that loves me, he will give me croissants. I know it. I know it. So thank you for listening to my spiel on my personal faith and on Eucharist and Mass.
Thank you.
Okay, have any thoughts, questions, comments?
I think just going off of quarantine this year, like, I know a lot of other people felt this way too, but just like having the church shut down, like, at least for me, I didn't realize the importance of the Eucharist in my life until that was no longer available.
Mhm.
And then, so just that period of like deprivation from it made me realize like, wow, like this plays a huge role in my life, and I didn't really realize like the strength of it and like how many graces I received from it. So I think that was just a unique experience that I've had this year with it, and I know a lot of other people felt the same way as well, so.
Yeah.
Like how much of like a gift that it is, like not everyone gets the opportunity to receive that and like enter into that, and to be able to like enter into that and like receive Jesus, like and being like basically being carried the rest of the eternity.
Mhm.
I'm guessing like life is like really hard. Knowing that like I can always like run to Jesus and he's always there, like in that way, like in general. Just being able to take that in physically, like takes
Yeah.
it to a whole nother level.
No, I get that. In doing life things, in like going through life, so I'm not able to have the Eucharist yet, but when I do, that will be a sick day. But essentially, it's comforting because like I went through high school a lot, like, oh my gosh, I have to do all this stuff, and I still go through that in college, but at least like now, high school versus college, I'm just like, at least I know Jesus is got my back, and Jesus is rooting for me, and I don't necessarily have to rely on myself for that, because I can trust in.
Yeah.
That was the most awkward way to end that, but I didn't know how to end that.
No, I hear what you're saying. Like, there's a difference between wishing and hope, right?
Yeah.
We have to always remember that. Like, when we wish for something, it's like, I want a new car, right?
Yeah.
But hope is something that has no object. Hope is like, I hope to be blessed some way, and our Lord does. We may not do well in that class over there, but like wherever He closes a door, there's another one that opens, and that's our hope, and that we can rely on. We don't always know that we're gonna get what we want, but we will get something wonderful if we're just open enough to receive it. If we're just not so focused on what we specifically expect or demand of our Lord, that He will open up a door that we did not see.
It's more like, it's less like, oh, I don't know what I'm gonna do, because I was like, I don't know, my future's really shaky, I'm just
Yeah.
like, well, I trust that with God's help, my future, well, of course I'm gonna have to do things to accomplish things, like
Yeah.
that's kind of a given, that's the fact of life, but like, with God's help, I will be able to get to where I need to go, and I don't have to be scared of being by myself, because I was never by myself in the first place. I just have to realize that to help me along. And I'm very thankful for that, because I feel a little better. I'm still scared, but I feel a little better about it.
Yeah. Scared but not hopeless. Yeah.
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 Yeah, that's
Not
my motto.
despair. Scared but not in
Scared but
despair.
not hopeless.
Yeah.
I got a question.
Yeah.
So, I'm a math major too,
Okay.
and my whole life I've been very like analytical, like I believe in numbers.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to, like, just as of recently, I've believed in God, because I know not everything is numbers, but for me, that's all I see. So like,
Yeah.
as like I look at like the beauty of stuff and like all these good things that's happening, I'm like, okay, so there's definitely something there. Like I always knew it was there, but like I feel like it's getting stronger and stronger. But like, how hard was it to separate from numbers and be about God first and then numbers?
The hardest part for me was finding who could explain things to me in a way that I could understand them. And and I would say that that there were several authors, several books that I read that were very meaningful to me, and one of them is a really great book called The Everlasting Man by G.K. Chesterton. It's really great. It just talks about an anthropology of man. The first thing I'll say is that the Catholic faith can stand up to the most intellectual rigor and questions that you have of it. Like, and really the master of that is Aquinas, St. Thomas Aquinas. Like, if you really want to go like in hyperdrive, but it, you know, there's a lot of I think Aquinas is awesome and great, but he's also a little bit hard to read, and but so is G.K. Chesterton. Anyway, G.K. Chesterton's Everlasting Man was a good starting point for me. Then his next book, Orthodoxy, was also really helpful for me. And then the next book is this one here, which was really exciting for me. It's a little pocket book. Blew my mind. Here's the pocket Summa of St. Thomas Aquinas.
How many people carry a pocket Summa around?
Yeah.
Oh no! You really are a geek.
It's my fashion accessory.
Oh my God.
My Way of Life by the Confraternity of the Precious Blood. It's awesome.
Thank you.
All I have to say is that it's awesome. Like, when you start reading that and you're like, you know, just like things start to click.
You tore that thing apart.
Oh yeah, I
No,
gnaw
not you,
on
Brad.
my Trogon.
Public library told me stuff going on.
Pretty cool.
It's pretty succinct. The thing I like about that is that it's well explained, beautifully, and pretty succinct. So it's like you can read that, and then, you know, it kind of gives you the whole sort of what I would call Christian metaphysics, right? Because remember, like our faith gives a shape to reality, and for an intellectual, like, I need to know what that shape is in order to, like, again, I could trust it. I saw its goodness. In fact, even when I was an atheist, I thought that that the church was the place where goodness was. There was never a point in my life where I didn't think that the church wasn't the place where goodness was. But the thing is, I just didn't think that goodness was real, and that was the problem for me. You know, in a way, I feel like. And I feel like an idiot saying that on some level. Like, how could goodness not be real? But it was hard. It was really hard. So yeah, I think that book kind of pieces together the shape of Christian reality in a way that I think is very satisfying. And yeah, and I also think that for me, another person that really influenced me was Bishop Barron. Bishop Barron's talks. It's just like, and I wouldn't say that he's very intellectual, but he's also and so inspiring that he draws you into the kind of love that's possible through Jesus Christ, and he makes sense of that. And he's awesome too. So Bishop Barron, G.K. Chesterton's Everlasting Man and Orthodoxy, and My Way of Life. If you have a phone, if you're interested in the book, you can take a picture of it so it's easy to find.
Yes, I wrote it down.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Barron does a good job of taking the Aquinas and the Chesterton and making it understandable.
Yes. Yeah.
And he talks a lot about like science and like how it doesn't contradict faith.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Faith and reason, and so yeah. So he'd be a good one for you. That's awesome.
But I always like knew God was there. It just I didn't like put him first. I just
Mhm.
always put like the numbers behind it first.
Yeah.
So I have a couple comments. So, this is terrible because I
30
always
seconds.
have something to say.
Timer. You got 5 minutes.
No,
You ready?
I'm gonna do this in 1 minute.
Okay.
Oh,
One
Okay.
minute.
Okay. All right. I'm
I
ready.
can't see it.
No, you're great, you're great.
Okay.
No, it's me that they're worrying about
Okay.
right now. Okay. Okay.
Timer starting.
Wait, I haven't said go yet, right?
Ready?
Go. Okay, goodness. He commented about not believing in goodness. That's a product of our culture and our society today, okay? Scripture, wonderful. It says, in the end days, that which is called good will be called evil, and that which is called evil will be called good. So if we can be confused by what is goodness because of what we're surrounded with, that is a way that we move away from that which is truly good, because we're confused, because we're immersed in it. 500 years of trying to prove mathematically how things are and are not a certain way, but that's just a simple one. Number 2, last part. Parts of God, all right? So you may notice at Mass they'll take and they very carefully wipe off the paten, make sure every little particle, if somebody spills a drop of the wine, which is the precious blood, everything of God is contained in every single particle. We can't take a little piece of the Eucharist and have a little less of God. We can't take more of the Eucharist and have more of God. All of that essence is present in every particle. And that's important to know, so that when you see sometimes a little piece, it's like, oh, no, that is truly Jesus. Body, blood, soul, divinity, finished.
Wow.